Hi, I'm Alara. My mother forgot to hang up the phone. And for once, the silence told the truth louder than her voice ever did. I heard them, my own family, laughing about how they'd erase me, like I was just some burden. Not a daughter, not a person, just paperwork to clear out. They thought I was too quiet to fight back, but I remembered every word, and what I did next, they never saw coming. The kettle let out a soft hiss, and I turned off the flame before it could whistle. I liked it quiet in the mornings, just the creak of the wood floors under my slippers and the gentle rustle of the Spanish moss outside my kitchen window. Savannah light in spring always had a sort of dignity to it, like it knew how to arrive without needing applause. I poured the hot water over the lavender tea bag, watching the tiny purple buds swirl up like a memory. Today was Thursday. That meant the weekly call. Right on time, the phone rang. "Hey, honey," my mother said, her voice clipped like the smile never quite reached her mouth. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying not to sound too eager. As usual, it started with the checklist. "How was I sleeping?" "Still walking around the neighborhood every evening?" she asked, but never paused long enough to really listen. I mentioned the watercolor I was working on, a quiet scene of Dad's old fishing pier. She hummed, said something about how Serena was redecorating the foyer and had sent photos. "Very elegant," she noted. "You'd like it." I didn't say anything about how no one had sent those photos to me. So I ventured, "I saw online that everyone was together last weekend. Looked like Serena's birthday dinner." Silence. "Then it was just a small thing," she said. "Last minute. You know how those things are." I looked at the linen napkin on my kitchen table, folded like a bird. Dad had taught me how to do that. Every Easter, I'd set one out for myself that morning, like a habit I couldn't shake. I could still hear his voice in my head. "Wings up. Fold firm, Ella. Birds don't fall when they fly with purpose." "Well, I would have come," I said quietly, even if it was just a small thing. Mom didn't answer directly. "Well, catch up soon, okay? Take care of yourself." Then came the click, but the line didn't disconnect. I moved to set the phone down, but then I heard it. Soft but unmistakable, her voice still on the other end. "That girl still thinks we care. She was never really like us." It was a slap without the hand. Another voice cut in, Serena's, colder. "If Dad hadn't put her on the deed, she'd be gone by now. She should be thanking us for not challenging it." They laughed. They actually laughed. "She's always been off. You remember when she cried about not being invited to the rehearsal dinner? Like she matters." My hand was still hovering above the phone, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "She's clinging to that house like it gives her some place in the family," Mom said again. "But we'll figure something out. Guardianship, maybe. She's always been fragile." My knees gave way and I sank into the nearest chair, the tea forgotten. Fragile? No, I was the one who sat by Dad's side through his chemo. I was the one who took his calls at 2 a.m. when the pain got too loud for him to sleep. Where were they then? Planning table settings, ordering flower arrangements? They were already rewriting the story and erasing me from it. The phone finally went silent. A click, then nothing. I stared at the napkin on the table, the one shaped like a bird. My fingers brushed against it, and it crumpled under the weight of something far heavier than paper. They hadn't just said those things in passing. It was casual, like they'd said it 100 times before, like this was who they'd always been when I wasn't in the room. And suddenly I knew. I wasn't part of this family. I was just in the way. I didn't move for a long time. The house just existed around me. Same lace curtains swaying gently. Same uneven tick from the old wall clock. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I don't even remember walking to the living room, only that I ended up there, staring at the phone still. In my hand, my tea had gone cold. The napkin bird on the table slumped, like it too had given up. For a while, I sat and let the silence spread, until I realized my phone had automatically saved the call. It was a setting I'd activated months ago, out of habit more than anything else. I didn't always trust my memory when it came to things Mom said. Now I had a record. Now I had proof. I listened to it again. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it echoed. That girl still thinks we care. She was never really like us. If Dad hadn't put her on the deed, she'd be gone by now. The way they said it, smooth, practiced, like they'd told the story so many times they believed it. I felt like I was walking barefoot across shards of every family dinner I'd ever sat through. I started thinking back to Serena's insistence that she handled the legal stuff after Dad passed. It's just cleaner that way, she'd said, like I was a messy coffee ring on the paperwork. I remembered Mom telling me, "You don't need to worry about the estate, baby. We'll keep you in mind." Keep me in mind. I used to think that was kindness. Now, I wasn't so sure it wasn't shorthand for stay out of the way. My legs moved on their own, carrying me to the hallway closet where I kept the old family files. Just a weathered filing box with Dad's scribbled label. House. Medical. Everything else. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the rug, and opened it. Bills, letters, a few of Dad's prescriptions. Then, tucked inside a yellowing envelope with no name on the front, I found them. Forms. Guardianship, transfer. Documents. Unfiled, unsigned, but real. My stomach dropped. In pencil, Serena had written, "Pending Mom's doctor letter. Not if, just pending." They weren't planning to help me. They were planning to own me. I leaned back against the wall, the envelope limp in my lap. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, maybe this was a misunderstanding. But the call wasn't an accident, and that pencil note wasn't kindness. This wasn't sudden. I started to rewind further. A few months back, no, maybe a year now, there was a birthday lunch for Livia's youngest, Noah. They'd held it at a fancy inn up in Bluffton, one of those places where even the butter had a last name. Everyone was dressed like they were being interviewed for a magazine. I showed up in one of Dad's old cardigans. It still smelled like cedar and coffee, and I thought it would make me feel close to him. When it came time for the group photo, Serena said, "Could you hold these, Ella dear?" She handed me purses and jackets and a pair of sunglasses with rhinestones on the bridge. I smiled because I always did, and stepped out of the frame. I remember thinking, it's fine. I'll take the next one, but there wasn't a next one. When they posted the photo, it said all of us underneath. I zoomed in. I could see the edge of my hand holding Livia's bag. They didn't forget me. They removed me. Back in the present, I sifted deeper into the box, desperate for something, anything, that didn't feel like betrayal. Instead, I found a photo. Easter. 1984. I was 7, maybe 8, sitting at the table, folding napkins into birds for everyone. Dad was laughing in the background, hands mid-clap. I looked happy, focused, but in the edge of the frame, blurred but unmistakable, stood Serena. Not smiling, not even watching Dad. Just staring at me like I was holding something she wanted. And now I realized I probably was. He gave me his time, his attention, his trust. They gave me space, just enough to not be noticed until it was too late. I looked back at the guardianship papers. They were planning something long before that call. It wasn't just mean-spirited, it was structured, careful. I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased with precision. The sun had barely lifted past the trees when I opened my eyes. I hadn't changed out of my clothes. The stiff denim of my jeans pinched behind my knees, and the knit sweater clung to my shoulder where I dozed, off on the couch. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and something older. Dust, maybe, or memory. I sat up slowly. The old floorboard creaked under my bare foot as I stood. Not from pain this time, but weight. The kind that settles when you realize the truth wasn't hiding. It was sitting in plain sight, and you just refused to look at it. My fingers brushed the folded napkin still on the table. Last night's symbol of who I used to be. Today, it felt fragile, like something that wouldn't survive one more fold. I poured a glass of water and stood at the sink, watching the light bleed across the porch. The oak outside had started budding. Dad always said spring in Savannah came in through the windows before the calendar ever caught on. And then I remembered something. Years ago, just after his stroke, Dad took my hand in his and said, "Ela, there's a drawer in the desk. I don't want you to open it unless they start treating you like a guest in your own life." At the time, I laughed it off, said, "Daddy, that's dramatic." He didn't laugh, just looked at me like he was seeing too far ahead. The desk was still in the study, same one he'd used to track the church donation letters, the bills, his war, medals. And I had never once opened that bottom left drawer. Until now. I knelt beside the desk and ran my hand along the carved edge. The key was taped under the drawer's rail, exactly where he used to hide the emergency fund envelope. The lock clicked and I pulled. Inside, a flash drive in a labeled case, several envelopes, and a folded sheet of thick paper. The envelope on top was addressed in Dad's handwriting. "Only if they come for you." I opened the thick sheet first. It was a doctor's letter, stamped, sealed, dated. According to this official note, I had exhibited early signs of cognitive decline and should be monitored for long-term safety concerns. It was signed by a Dr. Kalin, except the name was spelled wrong. Kalin had one E, not two, and I knew that because he'd been our neighbor for 12 years before moving to Charleston. He used to bring me orange popsicles when I sat outside drawing in the summers. I had never been his patient, never stepped into his clinic. And yet here, he was diagnosing me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the next document. This one wasn't handwritten. It was a scanned copy of a will, one that looked almost identical to the one filed after Dad passed. But the signature? It was wrong. Too smooth. Lacked his old man. Tremble. It looked traced. In this version, the family estate was reallocated to maintain safety and stability. My portion removed, with consideration for the subject's best interest. Subject. Not a daughter. Subject. I closed the document and sat there, knees folded under me on the rug, heart buzzing like static. The next file was a USB, an old one, silver and scuffed. I plugged it into Dad's laptop. The screen blinked twice before opening a folder titled Cabin Joint Property. The emails were plain. Serena emailing a realtor. "Can we proceed discreetly with the sale? Just list as estate cabin not in her name." Another reply, title discrepancy. "One of the owners is still living. Recommend you resolve this first." Still living. Me. That cabin was in both our names. Dad had added me after his third heart scare. "Just in case," he'd said. I thought he meant emergencies. I didn't think he meant them. I pulled out my phone, took pictures of everything. Letter, will, emails, title documents. I copied files to the cloud, then printed them, and then made backups of the backups. For years, they saw me as the quiet one, the helper, the invisible middle woman between their schemes and Dad's kindness. But now I had their words, their fingerprints, and they had no idea how loud the quiet one could get. I walked back, into the kitchen, pulled a fresh napkin from the drawer. This time I didn't fold a bird. I folded a box, something that held things. Something square, defined, contained. Secrets don't fly. They stay locked in drawers until someone opens them. I pressed the final crease down flat and whispered, "Daddy, I see it now. I see it all." They weren't careless. They were calculating. And they were about to learn that even the softest daughter remembers where the files are kept. I didn't sleep much the night before. My hands were still sticky from the printer ink, and my mind ran like it had somewhere to be. I lay in bed with the ceiling fan spinning slow above me, waiting for sunrise to burn off the haze inside my chest. And then the phone rang. It was 9:14 a.m. I remember because I had just taken the tea kettle off the burner, and the clock on the stove blinked stubbornly from the last outage. "Ella?" Serena said. Her voice was soft, purposefully light. "I thought we should catch up. Just us. No drama. How about lunch?" I blinked into the steam curling from my mug. There had been no contact since the day I heard them through the phone. No apology, no mention of what was said when they thought I wasn't listening. But now, suddenly, she wanted to catch up. I told her yes. I don't know why. I didn't say no. Maybe part of me wanted to watch her lie. Maybe I just needed to see her face when I didn't flinch. We agreed to meet downtown at Ivy Table, a posh cafe Serena had always bragged about. She once told me she knew the owner, though I suspected that just meant she had eaten there more than once and tipped well enough to get noticed. At 1 p.m. sharp, I parked 2 blocks away and walked the cobblestone path in low heels and a pressed linen blouse. I wore the earrings our father gave me on my 30th, tiny pearls set in gold, and tied my hair back with a brown silk scarf. I looked like someone who wasn't lost. Serena was already seated when I arrived, tucked neatly into the corner booth, her sunglasses perched on her head like a polished tiara. "Ela," she smiled, standing to hug me like we'd never stopped being sisters. I returned the hug, light, brief enough to check the box. "You look radiant," she said, waving at the hostess like we were being watched. "That color is beautiful on you. Have you been sleeping well?" The pause after that last question wasn't casual. It wasn't concern. It was bait. We ordered salads. Hers came with shrimp, mine with chicken. Serena insisted on sparkling water, said she was cutting back on caffeine, and then, in the same breath, said she hadn't slept well in weeks because of Mom. "She's been worried," Serena began, as she dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "You seemed a little scattered last time we talked." I said nothing, just sipped water and let the silence settle. "She mentioned you forgot the code." "To the front gate," she added. "And last week, Mrs. Davies from across the street said she saw you in the driveway, just standing there." I placed my fork down, careful, deliberate. "I was watching a hawk. There's a nest in the cypress. Mrs. Davies probably doesn't notice birds unless they're on her welcome mat." Serena gave a thin chuckle, like I'd missed the point. "Ella, I'm not saying anything's wrong. We all have moments." She leaned in. Her fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "But it might be a good idea to talk to someone. Just to get ahead of things. You know, document where you are now, just in case." There it was, the real reason for lunch. This wasn't about shrimp salad and sisterhood. This was stage 2. First came the whisper campaigns. Mom worried, neighbors suspicious. Then came the suggestion, be proactive, protect yourself. What they meant was, make it easier for us later. I sat straighter, adjusted the napkin in my lap. "That's lovely how much you care. I'll take it under consideration." Serena blinked. Her mouth opened a hair, then closed again. She hadn't expected me to nod. She expected protest, defensiveness, anything to confirm what she was building. I smiled and flagged the server. "We'll take the check." "I can get it," Serena offered, almost too fast. "I've got it." I reached into my purse and pulled out cash, precisely counted, unfolded, smooth. I laid it in the tray and folded the receipt on top, like I'd done it 1,000 times. It wasn't about paying. It was about not needing her. As I stood to leave, I looked down at the napkin beside my plate. The server had folded it into a tidy triangle. Something about it tugged. A memory. In middle school, I used to draw birds. In the corners of my notebooks, caged ones, always with the bars just slightly too close. I left it on the table. Let her see it. Let her wonder. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun caught the edge of a wind chime across the street. It rang once, then again. I didn't turn back. 2 days passed. The air outside thickened with that heavy southern stillness just before the blooms burst open. I hadn't left the house since the lunch with Serena. Not because I was afraid. I just didn't want to miss a single movement around me. I kept the blinds tilted slightly open, not wide enough for a full view, but enough to catch shadows on the porch. My father used to say, "If someone knocks when they think you aren't watching, that's the knock you should pay attention to." At 10:32 a.m., someone did knock. Not a soft tap, not the UPS thud. It was deliberate. Knuckles to wood. Pause. Then, again. When I opened the door, Diana Wells stood on my porch. Diana Wells, my mother's best friend since Bible study in '87. A woman who wore floral scarves like armor and smiled like everything out of her mouth was a compliment until you replayed it later. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, holding a canvas tote. "Your mama mentioned you might need a little help getting reorganized." I blinked. I didn't know I was disorganized. She laughed, breezing past me into the hallway as if she'd been invited. "You know how we all get sometimes. Hormones, grief, stress. It muddles the brain." From the bag, she pulled out a clear plastic pill organizer, a few vitamin bottles, and a printed document. She asked me to drop these off, and this. She handed me the sheet. I scanned the header. Geriatric Neuropsychiatric Evaluation Referral. My name, my birth date, my address. Boxed in, neat Times New Roman. "I've never seen this doctor," I said flatly. "Well, it's just a referral. No one's saying anything's wrong, but your mom said you've been forgetting things, and Lord knows. Better safe than sorry, right?" I held the paper tighter, forcing my voice to stay still. "Diana, how long have y'all been planning this?" She blinked fast. "Ella, don't make this into something ugly. Everyone just wants to help." She left soon after. I didn't walk her out. Instead, I locked the door, turned off the kettle I hadn't realized was on, and sat on the floor, my legs folded beneath me like I had to lower myself to understand the moment. They weren't just talking behind my back. They were formalizing it. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being pre-written, defined, diagnosed. That night, I needed something to ground me. I went to the bookshelf in my bedroom to grab my journal, the leather one I kept tucked behind the field guide to native plants. I'd used it for years, not daily, but consistently enough that it held everything. Thoughts, drawings, code words I used for account passwords. It was gone. I pulled every book off the shelf, pulled the guide apart, checked under the bed, inside the sock drawer. I even opened the linen closet, just to be sure. Gone. My stomach curled, then twisted. No one had broken in. There were no signs of a struggle. But someone had been here. Someone knew exactly where to look. And then I remembered. Months ago, Serena had asked me at Mom's house, "You still write those little poems in that old book?" I'd shrugged it off at the time, just one of her little digs. Now I knew better. They'd read it, used it, probably copied whatever they could to build this confused little sister case. It made me feel naked, violated. Not just because they'd crossed a line, but because they believed they could, that I'd be too soft, too sweet, too slow to notice. I wasn't sure what to do first. So I sat in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea, trying to breathe around the knot forming in my chest. Around 4 p.m., I called the bank. The woman on the line was kind. She sounded young, her voice bright and too chipper for what I needed. I kept my tone light, conversational. "Could you walk me through any recent transfer changes on my accounts?" I asked. A pause. "Yes, Miss Ashton. Last Thursday, your weekly auto transfer to the caregiver account was updated. It increased by $200. My throat went dry. "I didn't make that change," I said. She hesitated. "It was done online, logged in from a registered device." I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still. They had access to my online banking. Through my journal, my notes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I got angry. Quiet, precise anger. The kind that spreads like ink through water. Slow, but irreversible. I walked down the hall to the coat closet, knelt on the wooden floor, and pulled up the loose tile Dad had taught me to lift as a child. Inside, still, wrapped in the same cloth napkin he'd used the day he built it, was the red toolbox. It smelled of cedar and oil. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a cassette recorder, labeled in Dad's handwriting. Father's Day, 2005, for Ela. I carried it to the kitchen, popped in the tape, pressed play. A bit of static. Then his voice, warm and steady, filled the room. "Ela, you've always been stronger than you think. You don't fold. You just wait until the moment matters." I sat with it, let it pour into me. Then I reached for the nearest napkin on the counter, smoothed it out, and folded it. Not into a bird this time, but into a shield. Boxy, sturdy, quiet. It would sit on my nightstand. Let them come. But this time, I wouldn't answer the door with tea. I didn't sleep much that week. The house had grown too quiet. Like even the floorboards knew something was coming. I stopped. Making tea, stopped folding napkins. I didn't need rituals anymore. I needed information. And I needed someone who remembered who I used to be before they started whispering otherwise. Ms. Eleanor Vance didn't look like she was in her 80s. She had the posture of someone who'd stared down senators and a voice that could slice butter, without ever raising above a whisper. Her office, tucked into a second-floor suite above a bookstore downtown, smelled faintly of old paper and peppermint. Everything about her said one thing. She still paid attention. She glanced over her glasses, at the stack of folders I'd carried in. My hands trembled when I placed them on her desk. "I don't know if this is all just me losing it," I said quietly, "or if I'm already too late." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She opened one folder, adjusted her reading glasses, and flipped through a few pages in silence. Then she looked up. "Ella," she said, "you are the last person I'd ever call delusional. Arthur made sure of that." I leaned in. "You knew my father well?" "Your dad was a planner. A quiet man, but never passive. He came to me 6 months before he passed." She pulled out a thick stamped envelope from her cabinet, passed it across the desk. "That," she said, "is the key to a revocable trust, created solely in your name, with protections in place in case certain parties, his words, ever tried to undermine you." I stared at it, hands still. "What kind of protections?" Eleanor gave me a long look. "A separate executor, a fraud alert network with the bank, and a notarized letter outlining the possibility of coercion." My throat tightened. I couldn't swallow. Could barely breathe. "He said you'd doubt yourself," she added, softer now. "But he didn't." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Keep going," I whispered. "Please." She reached for another folder, opened it. Inside, a copy of a power of attorney form. The top corner bore a familiar print header. My name, my address, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. Twist of the E, the sharp loop on the L. Close enough to pass at a glance, but not mine. "I never signed this." "No notary seal, no witness. Serena submitted this directly to your mother's financial advisor, claiming it was for emergency preparedness." The room spun just a little. "And it was accepted?" "Temporarily, until the trust's fraud system flagged a transfer last week." She opened her email, clicked once, and turned the screen toward me. A transfer request. $25,000 from my trust account to Diana Brightwell. Blocked. Auto-flagged. Status: suspicious authorization. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "You were seconds from being legally robbed," Eleanor said. I sank back in the leather chair. The quiet in my chest wasn't peace. It was ice forming where fire used to be. "They think I'm fragile," I murmured. "Easier to dismantle piece by piece than confront head-on." She smiled, just barely. "What do you want to do next?" I sat still for a moment, fingers tightening in my lap. "I don't want them arrested," I said. "Not yet. I want them seen. I want people to hear the tape, read the forgeries, know exactly how far they were willing to go before I stopped them." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Public exposure. We can build that." As she began drafting a legal motion, I picked up the forged POA and folded it corner to corner, triangle to triangle. It was reflex now. But this one, I wouldn't place beside my bed. This one would go to court. Before I left, Eleanor placed a new pen in my hand and guided it to the correct signature. Line. Legal updates, defense mechanisms, the start of my own counter-move. On the way out, I paused in her waiting room, pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, and looked down at the folded triangle still tucked into my pocket. Let them chase signatures. This time, they'd get one to remember. I didn't sleep the Night before. Sleep was for the innocent or the unaware, and I was neither. I stayed up, going over the flash drive, playing that call on repeat until the voices no longer shook me, but sharpened me. I watched the sunrise while folding one more napkin, this time into a sword, not for battle, but for truth. Serena's text came at 7:42 a.m. Family brunch, just talk, hope you can make it. Not, would you like to come? Not, I'm sorry. Just a trap wrapped in hospitality. I put on my slate gray blouse, the one she once said made me look like a courthouse secretary. I took my time curling the ends of my hair, letting them rest softly on my shoulders. At exactly 9:50, I locked the front door of my house and got into the back seat of Eleanor Vance's dusty Cadillac. She didn't ask me if I was ready. She only said, "You brought the flash drive." "I brought a memory," I told her. "Let's return it." We arrived at Serena's just before 10 how, and the brunch was already in motion. The smell of rosemary potatoes, sourdough toast, and some overly confident floral perfume drifted from the front door. Mark, Serena's husband, opened it. "Ilara," he said, surprised. Then his eyes landed on Eleanor. "And you are—" "Legal counsel," she answered, breezing past him like a summer storm in heels. The dining table looked like a Southern Living photo shoot. Crystal water goblets, monogrammed linen napkins, tiny glass bowls of butter. At the head of the table sat our mother, stiff-backed, dressed in pale blue, eyes vacant but alert. Diana was already seated too, pretending to be comfortable, holding a mimosa like it might vanish if she blinked. She offered a sugary smile. "So glad you could join us, Ela." I sat across from Serena. Eleanor took the empty seat beside me and placed her leather briefcase on the table without ceremony. Serena cleared her throat. "Well, since everyone's here, I thought maybe we could clear the air, put things behind us." "You mean like forged documents, financial transfers, or what you called quiet relocation plans?" I asked, steady. Her jaw twitched. "I'm not sure what you think you know." "Good," I said, pulling the flash drive from my purse. "Then let's listen together." I passed it to Mark, who sat beside the small Bluetooth speaker Serena had clearly set out for her version of calm brunch music. "Would you mind?" He looked confused but inserted the drive. The sound started, clear and casual. Serena's voice. "She still thinks we care." Then Julian's voice followed, snide and sharp. "She's too stupid to see what's really going on." Serena again. "Once we get her to sign, we'll move her out quietly. It's the kind thing to do." The room didn't just go quiet, it curdled. Mark pushed his chair back, slow, as if trying not to break the floor. "You forged power of attorney documents in my wife's name?" he asked, looking directly at Serena. "That's what this is, Mark." "No, don't mark me." "Did you actually file fake legal paperwork?" Her silence was her answer. He stood. "Call me when the trial date's set." "I'll testify." He walked out without another word. Diana set her mimosa down, hands shaking. "Mom." She didn't move, didn't blink. I turned to her. "You knew. And you stayed silent." Her lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. Eleanor leaned over, whispering low enough that only I could hear. "This is how people bury themselves. You just handed them the shovel." I stood. My tea remained untouched. I reached for my napkin, folded not like a bird or a box, but a sword. I laid it gently on my plate. "I think we're done here." 2 weeks passed, but I felt none of the usual heaviness that comes with waiting. There was no dread in the pit of my stomach. Just steel. The kind my father used to describe in the quiet evenings on the porch when he'd say, "Some storms don't shake you. They sharpen you." I stood outside the courthouse beside Eleanor Vance, her white hair pinned tight and her face unreadable, behind dark sunglasses. She adjusted her blazer like a general before battle, then handed me a leather folder. "Let them talk. You let the documents talk louder." Inside were years of evidence, forged signatures, emails, quiet thefts dressed as concern, all wrapped in a neat bow of betrayal. We filed everything by 8:45 a.m. sharp, contesting my mother's will, voiding the power of attorney paperwork that never should have existed. I didn't shake. I didn't blink. I signed everything with the hand they'd tried to steal. This isn't about revenge, I whispered to Eleanor. This is about drawing the line so no one ever crosses it again. She nodded. We're not just stopping them, we're setting precedent. By 10 we were seated in courtroom 3B. Serena arrived. In a blush silk blouse and matching heels. Diana wore pearls like armor. They smiled when they entered until they saw Eleanor and then me. I didn't smile back. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a braid, looked over the room with the weight of someone who had seen this kind of case far too many times. Eleanor began calmly, pulling apart the timeline with surgical ease. Documents presented, inconsistencies noted, medical statements debunked. And then came the forged power of attorney, enlarged and projected on the courtroom screen. That signature, Eleanor said, pointing, does not match Miss Ashton's on any legal form in the past 10 years. No notary, no witness, but somehow it was accepted at a financial institution until the fraud alert Arthur Ashton himself embedded triggered. Serena shifted in her seat. Diana avoided eye contact with the bench. Their attorney, slick-haired and overconfident, tried pivoting. This was all out of concern. Serena and Diana believed Ella was showing signs of confusion, forgetfulness. Eleanor held up her hand. If it pleases the court, I'd like to introduce one more piece of evidence. She plugged in a second flash drive. The audio filled the room. Diana's voice. Just pretend you thought she was sick. Play it, Thierry, the judge. We'll eat it up. There was a moment when everything froze. A cough caught, a paper rustled. Then silence fell again, but heavier this time. Serena's lawyer buried his face in his notes. The judge looked directly at the two women across from me and said, "This court sees clear evidence of undue influence, manipulation, and attempted financial exploitation." The verdict came down like a door slamming shut. All documents submitted under the fraudulent POA were invalidated. Arthur Ashton's original trust was fully restored. I was granted sole control over my father's financial estate. Serena and Diana were barred from any fiduciary roles or access, now or in the future. You're fortunate, the judge added, that criminal charges haven't been filed, yet. We exited into the early afternoon sun. There were no cameras, no reporters, just thick air and the squeak of courthouse doors behind us. My mother stood near the edge of the walkway. She hadn't spoken in weeks, not even during the trial. I walked toward her, not with anger, but with the weight of everything I'd had to carry alone. You still haven't said a word, I said. She blinked, not slowly, not regretfully, just blank. I waited. 1 beat, 2. But there was nothing behind her eyes. No remorse, no love, only dust where something used to live. I reached into my bag and pulled out the triangle I'd folded from the forged POA. That ugly little piece of paper had been their rope. I'd turned it into a blade. I walked past the planter box by the courthouse steps and slipped the triangle inside, burying it beneath the mulch. Their mess was no longer mine to carry. There was no applause, no celebration, just a strange, clean stillness that came after the dust had settled, and I welcomed it like an old friend. 2 months have passed since the court's decision, and I now wake each morning to a view my younger self would have sworn was a postcard. My small retirement cottage sits a few steps from the edge of the Georgia coastline, where the wind smells of salt and lavender, and the light arrives early through the east-facing windows. I keep them open, even in the cooler months, so the light pours straight into my studio corner. Every morning I paint the same subject, the moment just before sunrise. The colors never lie, neither does the sea. The light never lies, I say aloud sometimes. To the brush, to myself, to the past that still visits but no longer stays. My days are smaller now, but they feel fuller. I walk the beach in the morning. I clip herbs from a tiny garden that smells like rosemary and forgiveness. On Tuesdays, I join a book club in town, mostly women in their 60s and 70s, who've all outlived something or someone. None of them ask questions I don't want to answer, and none of them fold their lives small to make others more comfortable. I've learned that silence is not always empty. It's where truth sometimes lives, under the noise people make to distract you from what they're really doing. Serena sold her house to cover what the court didn't freeze. I heard from Eleanor that she's living in a condo outside Macon now, alone. Diana's husband left her weeks after the judgment, took the children, moved closer to his sister in Charleston. Neither of them has tried to reach me. Silence, I wrote in my journal, is sometimes the only apology they know how to give. My mother resides in an assisted living facility upstate. I receive holiday cards from her now. Generic, unsigned, clearly written by a nurse or aide. Sometimes I wonder if she even knows they're sent. I haven't visited. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. I no longer carry the question of why she never defended me. That question belongs to the old me, the one who sat in the shadows of family tables and thought her quietness was a flaw. One afternoon, I opened an old sketchbook while reorganizing my shelves. Between two faded pages, a napkin fell into my lap, folded into the shape of a heart. It stopped me cold. I remembered the moment. I was 14. My father was home from surgery. I had made soup from a box and folded that heart while waiting for the noodles to soften. He'd smiled, slipped it into his wallet, and said, "Some things speak louder than flowers." I pressed it flat and placed it under my most recent painting, a watercolor sunrise that bled from gold into ash blue. I titled the piece, "The Call Left Unanswered." Because not all battles leave scars you can point to. Some leave truths that reshape you quietly, like waves along a shoreline. Gradual, steady, undeniable. I'm no longer the forgotten one, not the fragile one, and definitely not the fool they thought would stay folded. Yesterday, I wrote a letter. Not to send, just to close the loop. "You once said I folded too easily," I wrote, "but you never asked what shape I was becoming." I slipped the letter between the pages of that same journal, the one they once tried to steal. It stays tucked beside my bed now, not as protection, but as proof. I won't fold again, but if I do, it'll be into something sharp, something beautiful. Sometimes. It's not the words you hear, it's the silence after that tells you who they really are. Have you ever heard the truth by accident? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.